Morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Sarasota and Lakewood Ranch Unitarian Universalists. It's so good to see you this morning, but as everyone else is, I'm really disappointed that we aren't together in person this week. It's a bit of a setback, but we'll get through it, and hopefully we'll be together again before too much longer. I'm Beth Miller, one of the associate ministers here. And joining me in today's service is Bud Friend Jones, our other associate minister, and Robert Lischetti, and Don Bryn, and our guest musician, C.Y. Hong, who Robert will introduce a little further along in the service. So if you're visiting with us, I want to give you a special welcome this morning and invite you to go on our welcome page on the UUCS website and look at the visitors page and click around. There's a virtual guest book there as well that you can sign. And if you do that, you'll receive our newsletter and you'll receive invitations to our Zoom events and all that kind of thing. There's lots of information there, so please take a look at that. I also want to encourage you to give generously on our donate button that's also on the website on the front page. We will have an offertory played this morning, and during that time you can feel free to do that, or you could do that at another time. But we would love to encourage you to contribute this morning. Also, please join me after the service this morning for a virtual coffee hour at the same Zoom link that you used for the forum this morning. I'd love a chance to touch base with you, see how you're doing, and generally just catch up a little bit. And now we have a special announcement from Linda Bodycomb and our own Catherine Bonner, who is also joining us in the service this morning, about the UUSC. Come on forward.
Catherine. Hi. Thanks for joining me today to help make the announcement for the membership drive for the UU Service Committee. As you know, we do the membership drive in January. That's because we usually have someone from the Service Committee in our pulpit each January, but since COVID started, we can't do that. So we're relying on videos from the UUSC, as well as our own personal messages. And all the great work that you and the children have been doing. Can you tell me what you've been up to?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, first of all, for having us here. You know, every year we talk to the children about the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee and the Guest at Your Table program. You know, that program generally starts right around Thanksgiving time, and it goes through the end of the year. And it's a program that has actually got a twofold meaning for it. It helps to engage the children and our congregants about the work that the UUSC does, and it's a fundraising for the organization. You know, it's kind of like those NPR pledge weeks at the end, but instead of having you hear the pledge every week, we put a box. The box is to go home, be sat at the dinner table, and you would put the money in as you would have if you had paid for a meal for that guest. Then at the end of the year, we would gather up all of those funds, and those funds then would go to the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. However, at our church, we recognize that especially during the busy holiday season, families don't sit down to eat together very often. So instead of that, this year what we decided to do is we held 2 classes in December talking about the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee and its work, human rights, which is kind of the theme for this year, as well as the Guest at Your Table program. Then our youth group held 2 bake sales back-to-back in December, and they raised $150 as part of the Guest at Your Table program for the UUSC. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but you know, every little bit helps.
I think it's really amazing. That's a large amount considering the number of children that are in the RE program. One of the videos Catherine showed to the children is about human rights. We'd like to show it to you since it's a recurring theme this year in our social justice work for both adults and children. It's good for you to see what the children are seeing and how the work we adults do that connect with what the children are doing. I want to thank you in advance for your support for the work of the UU Service Committee. There are more details in the weekly contact and on our website to help you, update your membership. And now the video.
Human rights is a phrase you might hear in school, in the news, or in other places. But what exactly are human rights? And why are they important? Human rights are the basic freedoms and protections every person is born with that cannot be taken away. They do not have to be earned, and every person has them, including you. No matter who they are, where they live, what religion they practice, or anything else about them. Some examples of human rights are the right to be safe from violence, the right to education, the right to be treated fairly at work, and the right to stay in another country if you are not safe in your own. The idea that people have rights has been around for a long time, but the understanding that human rights are something that all people everywhere have is actually quite recent. It wasn't until 1948 that many countries around the world got together and all agreed to one universal list of what standards and protections should be guaranteed for all people. They listed these in a document called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which they agreed to on December 10, 1948. That's why we celebrate December 10th as World Human Rights Day. Unfortunately, there continue to be many places in the world, including in the United States, where some people's human rights are still not being respected. This is why it is so important to know about human rights and to speak out if someone's rights are not being respected. There are lots of ways to speak out for human rights, including public protests, telling government leaders what we want by writing letters or calling on the phone, making art to help people learn about human rights, and much more. Thank you for taking the time to learn about human rights and for doing your part to make sure that human rights are respected for everyone, everywhere.
Good morning. Our guest musician this morning is Chung Yan Hong, better known as CY. She's one of our favorites here at UUCS. She's a violinist with the Sarasota Orchestra. She has a master's degree from the Juilliard School of Music. Very well known in the community. We're happy to have her. She's won numerous important competitions throughout the U.S. and abroad. Welcome, CY. We're looking forward to hearing you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. So glad you're with us today. We light the chalice this morning in recognition of Unitarian Universalism's fourth principle. We covenant to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
In light of today's sermon topic and the month theme of intention, I wrote a special story for you, and I hope that you will enjoy it. There once was a young tree standing in a row with all of his many friends. He had grown up there, basked in the warm sunshine, and watched the world race by on the highway next to his tree stand. Every so often, a person would come by to check on him, on his health, and give him a trim if he needed it. Well, as he grew, his consciousness about the world grew too. And one day he thought to himself, this is so boring. I just stand here, and I don't get anywhere. I wish I had legs. I want to travel. I want to see the world. And just then a soft voice asked the tree, well, what would be your intent if you had legs? What do you mean by intent? Replied the tree. My intent is to better myself by seeing the world. And how would you better yourself? The voice asked. Well, the young tree thought about it for about a minute, and then he said, I'm not really sure, but I know I'll figure it out as we go along. So it shall be, said the voice. And the next day, the loggers came and chopped down the tree and his friends. Whoa, said the young tree, thought as he was bumping along on the truck. This is so cool, if a little painful. But as the young tree soon learned, life's transitions can be very painful, as he was chipped and boiled and rolled thin and put through a machine to dry him and add glue and cut him into small squares and package him with other small squares and then shipped again to finally end up in a restaurant. Well, the noise in the restaurant was incredible, but the young tree loved it, thinking to himself, now I'm on to something. And he literally was on to something, as an employee scribbled an address onto a square, stuck him on a paper bag for the delivery person to take him. But as the delivery was being made, the glue on the square was too weak, and he fell off, and he watched in horror as the delivery person and the paper bag walked away, leaving him on the sidewalk. Eventually, the square ended up in the gutter, and the street cleaners picked him up and threw him in the recycle bin. Man, thought the tree, the next time I want to be the paper bag. Clearly the paper bag is of importance. It's carrying things and no one ignores them. So after another painful transition, his wish came true, and he was a paper bag, crammed together with lots more in the grocery stores. This is gonna be so good, thought the tree, as he was finally filled with the canned goods and the vegetables that a shopper had purchased. Look at how important I am. I'm carrying the world on my shoulders, so to speak. People are just staring at me, pointing. Yeah, that's right, folks, I'm here. And at that precise moment, the bottom of the bag broke, and all the canned goods and the vegetables fell out. And people scrambled to help the shopper, and guess where the bag ended? Yep, once again in the recycle bin. Okay, thought the tree, that wasn't the best. I obviously need to be stronger. Cardboard boxes are strong. That's what I should be. And so after another painful transition, it came to pass. And this time, the tree ended up in a warehouse, a book warehouse. He was loaded up with books, taped and sealed, and passed from truck to truck until his final destination. He watched as the books were loaded onto the shelves where eager readers would pull them out to learn or laugh or cry. But eventually, he was, once again, cut up and thrown into the recycle bin. He thought to himself, these transitions are really just not a lot of fun. So, I think I'm okay with not seeing so much of the world. Maybe I ought to hold on to wisdom. I think it would be really cool if I came back as a book. I'd be so respected because I'd have so much wisdom. And so he did. Well, he became a reprint of a book written in the 1800s by an avowed white supremacist. Needless to say, he sat and sat and sat on the shelf with very few people even looking at him. He moved to the bargain book section, then the discount bin, and finally, you guessed it, to the recycle bin. As he rumbled to the recycle plant, the voice from long ago spoke to him, and he said, well, little tree, you have seen some of the world. Were you able to better yourself? I don't know, the tree replied. I tried to be bigger and stronger and wiser so people would see me and respect me, but nothing seemed to work, obviously, since I'm still here on my way back to recycling. Well, were you able to help others? I tried. I carried things, I had knowledge to share, but was your intent to help others or really just for you? When our intent is for selfish reasons, others can often see it and will shy away. So what would you like to be now? Well, the tree thought about it for a while and decided on something where he could pass on what he had learned about living a life of intention. So he became fertilizer for the next generation. So let us now sing our opening hymn, and I encourage all of those who are young at heart to join me at our RE Zoom call. If you need to have the link, just go ahead and email me, and I'll be glad to get you on there. And our opening hymn number is 1003, Where Do We Come From?
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery.
Let us center ourselves this morning with these words of invitation by Margaret Weiss. Come into this place with your whole self, the parts that are raw and exposed, the part that is beaming with joy, the part that is seeking the truth, the new, the possible. Come into this place and open your heart, lay down your burden, lift up your hope for something new to happen. Come into this place with fellow travelers on the journey, some faces new and others familiar, and all welcoming you here now to this moment. Come, let us be together in worship and in silence.
the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Our reading this morning is in 3 parts. The first part is a compilation of quotations on reincarnation. The theory of reincarnation, which has its roots in ancient Eastern religions and philosophies and influences many great Western minds. We offer 3 sets of these brief readings, eye-opening thoughts on reincarnation interspersed with some music.
We begin with these words from our own Unitarian Universalist heritage. 2 from Ralph Waldo Emerson, of course. The soul comes from without into the human body and into a temporary abode, and it goes out of it anew. It passes into other habitations, for the soul is immortal. And it is a secret of the world that all things subsist and do not die, but only retire a little from sight and afterward return again. Nothing is dead. Men feign themselves dead and endure mock funerals and mournful obituaries, and there they stand looking out of the window, sound and well. It is in some new and strange disguise. And then he quotes the Hindu text, Katha Upanishad. The soul is not born, it does not die, it was not produced from anyone, unborn, eternal, it is not slain, though the body is slain.
And from Henry David Thoreau. As far back as I can remember, I have unconsciously referred to the experience of a previous state of existence. And Charles Dickens, also one of our own. We all have some experience of a feeling that comes over us occasionally of what we are saying and doing having been said and done before in a remote time, of our having been surrounded dim ages ago by the same faces, objects, and circumstances. I now invite you to give generously on the donate button as CY plays our offertory music.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Continuing our compilation, hear these quotes from ancient philosophers and 19th and 20th century influences.
Socrates, I am confident that there truly is such a thing as living again, that the living spring from the dead, and that the souls of the dead are in existence.
Goethe, I am certain that I have been here as I am now 1,000 times before, and I hope to return 1,000 times.
Count Leo Tolstoy, as we live through thousands of dreams in our present life, so is our present life only one of many thousands of such lives which we enter from the other, more real life, and then return after death. Our life is but one of the dreams of that more real life, and so it is endlessly until the very last one, the very real life of God.
Walt Whitman, I know I am deathless. We have thus far exhausted trillions of winters and summers. There are trillions ahead, and trillions ahead of them.
And Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, I could well imagine that I might have lived in former centuries and there encountered questions I was not yet able to answer, that I had to be born again because I had not fulfilled the task that was given to me.
Henry Ford, the automobile manufacturer and captain of industry. Genius is experience. Some seem to think that it is a gift or a talent, but it is the fruit of long experience in many lives. We finish our compilation of readings with these 3 testimonies from ordinary folks about communications from the dead. This one is from Sarah D. of Tucson, Arizona. One night, my granny was just falling asleep, and Granddad asked her to lock the front door. She told him she was tired and he should do it, but he asked her again. So she dragged her sleepy self out of bed. It took a minute for her to wake up and fully remember that he was dead. She went and checked the door and found that she had left it unlocked. When she went back to bed, the room smelled strongly of his aftershave. We found out later that there were 3 break-ins on her block that night. He was watching out for her.
My uncle is an amazing artist. I asked him once where he gets his inspiration from, and he looked me dead in the eye and said, "The voices do." I asked him more, and he said there were muses among the dead, and he just had to listen for them. This might not seem like a big thing, but my uncle is a practical man and a pastor, so not the person you'd think believes in spirits. That was Oliver T. Casper of Wyoming.
And Carmen of Portland, Oregon, wrote, when my dad was 15, he was out playing ball with friends. His sister came to him seemingly out of nowhere and told him not to worry about her, and then she walked away. He thought that was sort of weird, but he shrugged it off. When he went home, his mother was hysterically crying. His sister had been killed in a car accident several hours earlier. I'm convinced she was dead when he said his final goodbye. Our video anthem this morning was written by Leon Dubinsky, a songwriter from Sydney, Nova Scotia, and performed by Celtic Thunder.
The waves roll on over the water, and the ocean cries. We look to our sons and daughters to explain our lives, as if a child could tell us why. That as sure as the sunrise, as sure as the sea, as sure as the wind in the trees, we rise again in the faces of our children. We rise again in the voices of our song. We rise again like the waves out on the ocean. And then we rise again. When the light grows dark with the forces of creation across a stormy sky, we look to reincarnation to explain our lives, as if a child could tell us why. That as sure as the sunrise, as sure as the sea, as sure as the wind in the trees, we rise again in the faces of our children. We rise again in the voices of our song. We rise again like the waves out on the ocean. And then we rise again.
Where do we come from? Where are we going? It is indeed one of the fundamental mysteries of our existence. We rise again? Do we? Do we rise again? I've long been interested in reincarnation. I'm fascinated by reports of past lives with those who claim to communicate with deceased loved ones and with those who've had vivid near-death experiences. Am I a true believer? No. I'm agnostic about those really big questions that we just can't answer for certain. I've never had a near-death experience or contact with the spirit world that I am aware of, but I know people who have, credible, mentally stable people. So I'm intrigued, and I'm open to these ideas. There was a woman who very much wanted to have children, and her husband said that he did too, but later he changed his mind and he refused to have children. She divorced that man, and eventually she married another man who very much did want to have children. Imagine then their disappointment when they discovered that she had fertility problems and there was not very much hope at all that she would conceive a child. One night, not long after, she was in bed and she awoke to find a man standing at the foot of her bed holding the hand of a little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes. It was her grandfather, who had been dead for like many years, and he said to her, "Helen, this is your son." And then they disappeared. It was so real. She wasn't asleep. She was wide awake. It was very real. And she did get pregnant and had a little boy who by the time he was 2 or so looked just like that little boy her grandfather had presented to her that night. Well, that was my mother, and the little boy was my brother. I came along 5 years later. I was not presented by a visiting ancestor, however. I just kind of came along on my own. Now, I know this isn't evidence of anything, but it is why I find this topic so intriguing. My mother became very interested in reincarnation, and she studied Edgar Cayce, that famous Christian mystic and psychic who died in 1945 after 40 years of giving readings to seekers, physically diagnosing medical conditions, and teaching about the soul's journey through many incarnations. My mother used to quote him as saying that every lifetime for the soul is like a day in school for the living. My mother told me this story when I was a teenager, and I rejected it at the time, but it planted the seeds of later curiosity and interest. So how widespread is belief in reincarnation? Well, it's impossible to know for sure, but worldwide there are over 300 million Buddhists, 800 million Hindus, unknown millions of pagans and adherents of various New Age religions, and several million among the people who say they are spiritual but not religious. Overall, it's reasonable to estimate that half the world's 7.6 billion people believe in some form of reincarnation. And a Gallup poll taken just a few years ago showed that in our predominantly Christian United States, 1/4 of us believe in reincarnation. Reincarnation, in its many variations, going back to at least Plato's time, is a belief in the development of the soul through multiple lifetimes. The soul is released from the body at death and exists briefly in a pure spiritual state before returning in a new body. In virtually all belief systems that include reincarnation, rebirth does, however, ultimately end. The purpose is the growth and spiritual development of the soul, its evolution to a higher state of being, free of all struggles, and finally ends the cycle of reincarnation. Interestingly enough, belief in reincarnation and in the spirit realm have a long history in both Unitarianism and Universalism prior to merger, and in since 1961 within our own current Unitarian Universalism. Modern spiritualism is a belief in the spirits of the dead, that they exist and have both the ability and the inclination to communicate with the living. Spiritualist practices have practices to help the living and the dead to communicate with each other, and these have sort of flourished in the second half of the 19th century. Just before the Civil War, 2 to 3 million Americans out of a U.S. population of only 30 million at that time, 2 out of 3 actively practiced spiritualism in some form or another. It was pervasive in this country into the early 1870s, and then though never dying out completely, spiritualism sort of faded a little bit. It was studied and practiced by people from lots of different religious backgrounds, including many Universalists and Unitarians. Many Universalists helped to shape spiritualism as through public lectures and promotions and editors of spiritualist newspapers. It fit with their doctrine of universal salvation, although it fueled the ongoing debate between the two different branches of Universalist belief in universal salvation. The Restorationists believed in progressive change and growth of the soul after death, so reincarnation totally made sense to them. But the Ultra-Salvationists believed that all souls were granted eternal salvation immediately upon death. Spiritualism and reincarnation fit well, of course, to the Restorationists, but not so much the Ultra-Salvationists, and so that created conflict, and some of the more vocal spiritualist, Universalist ministers actually lost their positions for preaching about it and found positions with Unitarian congregations that were interested in the topic. So at this point, transcendentalism had already become an integrated part of most Unitarian churches. Transcendentalism's reference to Eastern religions, its belief in the sacred within the everyday, and its preference for direct mystical experience provided a welcoming context for exploring spiritualism. Although Ralph Waldo Emerson, the father of transcendentalism, had doubts. In time, spiritualism faded in both Unitarianism and Universalist churches as they became more inclined towards science and evolution theory. Comparative religions and biblical criticism, and later with the advent of the American humanist movement, these things just sort of faded away or went underground at the time. Meanwhile, investigations into spiritualist practices in the general public had revealed quite a bit of fraud and very little scientific evidence, which was unavailable in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Tools and techniques didn't yet exist to explore in any systematic way the claims of spiritualists. But fast forward to the late 1900s and today, and things have changed. Hear this story from the University of Virginia magazine, not a pulp magazine, and neither is the university a minor university. Try to imagine being the parent of this child. When Ryan Hammonds was 4 years old, he began directing imaginary movies. Shouts of action often echoed from his room. The play became concern for Ryan's parents when he began waking up in the middle of the night screaming and clutching his chest, saying he dreamt his heart exploded. His mother, Cindy, asked his doctor about these episodes. Night terrors, the doctor said. He'll outgrow them. Then one night, as Cindy tucked Ryan into bed, Ryan suddenly took hold of Cindy's hand. "Mama," he said, "I think I used to be someone else." He said he remembered a big white house, and a swimming pool. It was in Hollywood, many miles from his Oklahoma home. He said he had 3 sons, but that he couldn't remember their names. He began to cry, asking Cindy over and over why he couldn't remember those names. I really didn't know what to do, Cindy said. I was more in shock than anything. He was so insistent about it. After that night, he kept talking about it, kept getting upset about not being able to remember those names. I started researching the internet about reincarnation. I even got some books from the library on Hollywood, thinking their pictures might help him. I didn't tell anyone for months. One day, as Ryan and Cindy paged through one of the Hollywood books, Ryan stopped at a black and white still taken from the 1930s from the movie Night After Night. 2 men in the center of the picture were confronting one another. 4 other men surrounded them. Cindy didn't recognize any of the faces, but Ryan pointed to one of the men in the middle. "Hey, Mama," he said, "that's George. We did a picture together." His finger then shot over to a man on the right side wearing an overcoat and a scowl. "That guy's me. I found me." That's the end of the quote. For more than 20 years, Jim Tucker, currently professor of neurobehavioral sciences and director of the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, has been investigating claims made by children, usually between the ages of 2 and 6 years old, who say they've had past lives. Some very young children provide enough detail that their stories can be traced back to an actual person who died years before. Tucker says, "I understand the leap it takes to conclude there is something beyond what we can see and touch. But there is this evidence here that needs to be accounted for, and when we look at these cases carefully, some sort of carryover of memories often makes the most sense." Dr. Tucker's predecessor and mentor at UVA, Dr. Ian Stevenson, who died in 2007, devoted 40 years to the scientific documentation of past life memories of children from all over the world, and had over 300 cases in his files. Both men have numerous academic papers and books you can read online, and Dr. Tucker has many presentations on YouTube. Just look it up if you're interested. The study of past life memories in children is one of 2 avenues of current credible research into reincarnation. The other is past life regression studies. Therapists have long reported anecdotes of clients revealing past experiences under hypnosis, but that isn't real scientific evidence. Research requires a critical mass of anecdotal evidence followed by controlled scientific studies. One of the most prominent figures in past life regression research today is Dr. Brian Weiss, MD. He's a traditional psychologist and psychotherapist, graduate of Columbia University and Yale Medical School, and chairman emeritus of the psychiatry department at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami. Throughout his studies and early research, he dismissed the whole idea of reincarnation. He was reluctantly drawn into it when a patient under hypnosis began talking about previous lives and spirit guides she said were her soul's therapists between lifetimes on earth. In his first book, Many Lives, Many Masters, Dr. Weiss tells Catherine's story. She came to his office with acute panic attacks, anxiety, and claustrophobia. After a year of traditional psychotherapy with no improvement, Catherine finally agreed to undergo hypnotherapy. Dr. Weiss thought perhaps her condition was related to repressed memories of childhood trauma, and if she could recall those events under hypnosis, it might address her problem and begin to free her from those memories and their effect on her. During one session, when Catherine was in a hypnotic stance, Dr. Weiss asked her to go back to when her symptoms first appeared. He did not expect what happened next. Catherine said, "I see a flight of white steps leading to a building with pillars. The front is very spacious with no porch. I am wearing a long skirt, a kind of robe made of rough cloth. My blonde hair is plaited." Dr. Weiss asked her what her name was. Her reply, "Aranda, 18 years of age. The land is barren, hot, and there is sand everywhere. There is a well and no river. The water flows from the mountain into the valley." She spoke of daily life and recalled her death in a flood as her child was torn from her arms and her soul floated above her body. As treatment continued, Catherine recalled other previous lives. Dr. Weiss was stunned by these revelations because she had not shown any symptoms of multiple personality or split personalities, and she was not taking any kind of hallucinating drugs. Catherine's mental and physical health began to improve, though. Eventually, she remembered more than 10 lives and also discovered that people who were part of her current life had also been part of other lifetimes, including Dr. Weiss himself. 4 years after the therapy sessions with Catherine began, Dr. Weiss wrote his first book about reincarnation, Many Lives, Many Masters, published in 1988. He's since worked with hundreds of patients from different social and religious backgrounds, including staunch atheists, and written 7 more books on the subject and numerous articles. He teaches other psychiatrists and psychologists his techniques for past life regression therapy that can provide breakthroughs to healing the mind, body, and soul of ailments that have to do with past lives. He's also studied near-death and out-of-body experiences extensively and shown how they help to confirm the existence of past lives and the reincarnation of souls. And there are now many other psychiatrists and psychologists and psychiatrists working with past lives and chronicling their experiences. But we're already way over time, and I want to circle back to Unitarian Universalism. Since the 1980s, interest in reincarnation and the existence of a spirit realm has actually returned and grown within some of our churches. Several components of our tradition invite such an interest in these ideas. We find openness to our 7 principles and 6 sources as an invitation. Consider 2 of our principles, a free and open search for truth and meaning, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And 3 of our sources, direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, wisdom from the world's religions, and spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life. And you can interpret those very different ways, but they do provide an opening for interpreting reincarnation. The adult religious education program, Cakes for the Queen of Heaven, was published in 1986, and its follow-up curriculum, Rise Up and Call Her Name, came out in 1995. These 2 curricula explored female-centered, earth-based religious spiritual traditions. They've been used in well over half of our congregations. CUPS, the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, that studies earth-centered and nature-centered religious and spiritual perspectives and the sacred circle of life, came along in 1987 and has had study groups in many of our congregations. The affiliated organization Psi Symposium, founded in 1969, has groups in some of our congregations studying, quote, the mystical and metaphysical, the psychic and intuitive, the esoteric and paranormal as pathways to the expansion of human consciousness. In the past 30 years or so, Unitarian Universalism has assimilated teachings from American Zen Buddhism, Native American spirituality, Wicca, and other forms of neo-paganism and New Age thought. You see references to this thought in some of our hymns and readings and worship, and in materials we use in small group and spiritual enrichment classes. I told you at the beginning that I'm not a true believer, but I know that many Unitarian Universalists are, and some are just curious, as am I. As a faith community, we've heeded the reminder the late Forrest Church gave at a sermon he gave at the UU National Convention in 1991. He said, "For too long, those of us with skeptical temperaments have contented ourselves with a false distinction, namely that anything not susceptible to rational proof is, by definition, irrational. What we tend to overlook is that beyond the rational and irrational lies the transrational realm. The rational realm includes everything that can be ascertained as fact. The irrational, everything that can be disproved according to the same criteria. Distinct from both, the transrational realm arches beyond the scope of our analytical capacity to parse the creation. My purpose has not been to convince you of the capital T truth of anything, because that is indeed beyond the scope of our analytical capacity to parse. My purpose has been twofold. One, to assure those of you who are true believers or just open and intrigued that you are not alone. Your inclinations and explorations fit within Unitarian Universalism. You are welcome and among friends. And my purpose has also been to gently remind those who think this is all hogwash of our UU approach to belief, so well stated in our fourth principle for which we lit the chalice this morning: acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, whatever direction that may take for ourselves and for all among us. As Unitarian Universalists, we are never expected to believe something that we don't or can't, but we are expected to respect one another's beliefs. I hope what I've shared will reinforce the words from one of our earlier readings by the scientist Thomas Huxley regarding reincarnation. None but the very hasty thinkers will reject it on the grounds of inherent absurdity. So may it be. Now let us join Robert in our closing hymn, number 354, We Laugh, We Cry, verses 1, 3, and 4.
Cry, we live, we die, we dance, we sing our song. We need to feel there's something here with which we can belong. We need to feel the freedom just to have some time alone. But most of all, we need close friends we can call our very own. And we believe in life and in the strength of love, and we have found a need to be together. We have our hearts to give, we have our thoughts to receive, and we believe that sharing is an answer. Our lives are full of wonder, and our time is very brief. The death of one among us fills us all with pain and grief. But as we live, so shall we die, and when our lives are done, the memory and strife. We search for truth, equality, and blessed peace of mind. And then we come together here to make sense of what we find. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found a joy being together. And in our search for peace, maybe we'll finally see, even to question truly is an answer.
Thank you, Robert. I apologize for going so long today. I didn't have it planned very well, but I hope you're still with me, and I will be in my office in just a couple minutes to see you at coffee hour if you still can make it. There's a benediction in our hymnal by the Reverend John Bingham that brings us back to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, our fourth principle for which we lit the chalice this morning. He wrote, "Go your ways, knowing not the answers to all things, yet seeking always the answer to one more thing than you know." May these words go with us as we extinguish the chalice this morning and bring us back safely when we meet again. So be it.